My son called me from the driveway of his own home. Not from inside. From the driveway. Sitting in his truck with the engine off. Voice low, like he was afraid someone might hear him through the walls. "Dad, can you come to Thanksgiving? Victoria's family will be there. I think I need you there." I told him, of course. I didn't ask why he was whispering. I drove 4 hours from Asheville to Charleston on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, past the long, flat stretches of South Carolina farmland, through the smell of pine and salt that tells you the coast is close. My son Ethan lived in a neighborhood called Palmetto Shores, where the houses were large and the lawns were professionally maintained, and nobody ever seemed to be outside enjoying any of it. I parked my 12-year-old Subaru wagon between a white Cadillac Escalade and a black BMW. I recognized the pattern immediately. I'd seen it before in a different context. A long time ago. In a different kind of room. Ethan met me at the door before I could ring the bell. He looked thinner than the last time I'd seen him. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there at Christmas. He hugged me harder than usual for a 42-year-old man, which told me more than anything he could have said on the phone. "Dad, thanks for making the drive. Wouldn't have missed it." I handed him the pie I'd brought. Pecan, his mother's recipe. "How are you doing, son?" He glanced back toward the interior of the house before answering. "Fine. I'm fine. Come on in." The living room had been rearranged since my last visit. The furniture Ethan and Victoria had picked out together when they moved in was mostly gone. The couch I'd helped them move up 2 flights of stairs was replaced by something angular and pale, the kind of furniture that looks expensive and feels deliberate. A gallery wall had appeared where Ethan's fishing photographs used to hang. The photos I'd taken with him on the Chattooga River, his first trout, the look of pure joy on his face at 17, were nowhere in sight. Victoria came from the kitchen. She was 39, impeccably dressed even at home, with the kind of composure that reads as warmth until you realize it never changes regardless of the situation. "Robert." She smiled the way a hotel front desk smiles. "So glad you made it safely. Long drive from the mountains. Good to see you, Victoria. The house looks beautiful. We've been updating." She said it the way people say it when they mean replacing. Her parents arrived an hour later. Gerald and Patricia Ashworth, of the Charleston Ashworths, as Gerald introduced himself to people at least twice per gathering, according to Ethan. Gerald had made his money in commercial insurance and had spent the subsequent decades making sure everyone knew it. He was 67, broad-shouldered, loud in the particular way of men who've never had to listen carefully to anyone. Patricia was quieter but sharper, the kind of woman who cataloged everything and said nothing until the moment the information was most useful. They also brought Victoria's brother, Christopher, who was 35 and worked for Gerald's company and had the look of a man who'd been told his whole life that he was exceptional and had begun to believe it completely. Gerald shook my hand with both of his. "Robert, good to finally put a face to the name. Ethan talks about you." He said it like it was a minor curiosity. "Good things, I hope." "Oh, sure. Retired, right? What was it? School administration?" "I was a federal judge for 22 years, I said pleasantly. "Retired 3 years ago." He nodded in a way that suggested he hadn't really heard me. "Well, nothing wrong with public service." We sat down for drinks before dinner. Gerald immediately dominated the conversation, moving from the Ashworth family's Thanksgiving traditions to the real estate market, to Christopher's recent promotion to the performance of Gerald's investment portfolio. Ethan sat in his own armchair in his own living room and said almost nothing. I watched him. He refilled drinks when glasses got low. He agreed when agreement seemed expected. He laughed at Gerald's jokes a half-beat after everyone else, the way you laugh when you're monitoring the room rather than being in it. At one point, Victoria interrupted something Ethan started to say. "Ethan, sweetheart, can you check on the turkey?" Without looking at him, he went. Gerald leaned forward. "You know, Robert, we're trying to convince these two to move closer to us. James Island has some beautiful new developments, close to the water. They seem happy here," I said. "Oh, Ethan's fine anywhere," Gerald said, waving a hand. "He's adaptable. But Victoria needs to be closer to family. She's not built for isolation. Charleston is 40 minutes from here," I said. "Exactly," Patricia added with a smile. "Too far." Dinner was set for 2 o'clock. The table was long enough for 8, though we were only 6. Victoria had cooked everything, which she mentioned 3 times in the first 15 minutes. The food was genuinely excellent. She had real talent in that regard. I said so, and meant it. Gerald said grace. A long grace. The kind that's more speech than prayer. Then, about 20 minutes into the meal, Ethan reached across to refill Patricia's water glass. His elbow caught the edge of a small dish of cranberry sauce. It tipped. A dark red arc crossed the white tablecloth and landed near Christopher's plate. Ethan was already apologizing, reaching for his napkin. "I'm sorry. I'll get it." Victoria's voice cut clean across the table. "Ethan." Her tone was the temperature of January. "Can you please just sit still? This tablecloth is Belgian linen. I'm sorry. I'll clean it. You always do this." She said it the way you say something you've said many times before. "You're not paying attention. You never pay attention at the table." The table went quiet. Christopher looked at his plate. Patricia rearranged her silverware. Gerald cleared his throat and reached for his wine. Ethan put the napkin down. His face had gone carefully blank. I recognized the blankness. It was the face of someone who had learned that reacting made things worse. "I'm sorry," he said again. Third time now. Victoria looked at her parents in a way that communicated something without words. A shared language I wasn't supposed to understand. Gerald gave a small nod. Patricia almost smiled. I set down my fork, picked up my water glass, took one slow sip. I'd spent 22 years on a federal bench. In that time, I had watched 800 and some odd cases come before me. I had listened to lawyers and witnesses and defendants and victims. I had learned to read rooms the way other people read text. Every shift in posture, every unfinished sentence, every silence that said more than the words on either side of it. What I was reading now at this Thanksgiving table in Palmetto Shores, South Carolina, was not a difficult marriage. It was not a personality clash. It was something I had unfortunately seen categorized in case files more times than I cared to count. "Excuse me for a moment," I said. I stood, folded my napkin, and walked toward the hallway bathroom. I didn't go to the bathroom. I walked to the coat closet where I'd hung my jacket, reached into the inside pocket, and took out my phone. I stood in the dim hallway with the sounds of the resumed table conversation behind me, and I called a woman I had not spoken to in 8 months. "Karen," I said when she answered. "It's Robert Calloway. I'm sorry to call on a holiday. Judge Calloway." Her voice shifted immediately to the register people use when they understand the call is professional. "What do you need?" Karen Delaney had worked family court in Charleston County for 16 years before moving to a private practice focused on domestic cases. She had sat in my courtroom more times than either of us could count. I trusted her the way you trust people who've shown you their character under pressure, rather than just described it. "I'm sitting at a Thanksgiving table watching my son get quietly dismantled in his own home," I said. "Emotional control, isolation tactics, family unit that reinforces the behavior. I want to understand what I'm looking at before I do anything. Tell me what you're seeing," she said. I told her, quietly, efficiently, the way I had trained myself to summarize fact patterns in 30 seconds or less. When I finished, she was silent for a moment. "That's coercive control, Robert. The clinical term is intimate partner psychological abuse. Physical doesn't have to be present for it to be abuse, though it often escalates. What do I do? Right now? Document. Don't confront. Confrontation alerts them and they'll close ranks. And Robert, you need to get him talking. He has to see it himself. You can't rescue someone who doesn't know they need rescuing." "I know. Thank you, Karen. Call me after the holiday." I put my phone away, stood in the hallway for 10 seconds with my eyes closed, and walked back to the table. The conversation had moved to Christopher's recent golf trip to Hilton Head. I sat down, picked up my fork, and listened to Christopher describe his handicap for the next 4 minutes. I watched Ethan. He'd poured himself more wine. He was nodding along to the story with the patient expression of a man who had practiced being invisible. After dinner, while the women cleared and Gerald and Christopher went to watch football, Ethan and I took our coffee to the back porch. It was cool and gray, the smell of marsh water on the air, a few herons standing motionless in the distance across the water. I didn't push. I've learned that men of a certain temperament, and Ethan is one, don't respond to direct questions about their pain. They need to arrive at it themselves. From the side, I said, "Your fishing pictures." I didn't see them inside. He wrapped both hands around his mug. Victoria thought the gallery wall would look better, more cohesive. I liked those pictures. He was quiet. I took them, I said. Every one of them. You remember that morning on the Chattooga when you caught the brown trout and you just stood there holding it for a full minute before you put it back? I still have that picture in my house. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Yeah, I remember. I let the silence sit. This is a skill almost nobody under 50 has, and it's more useful than most people realize. Then he said, quietly, "She means well. She just has high standards." I sipped my coffee. Her family's used to a certain way of doing things. I'm still learning. I nodded. I knocked over the cranberry sauce. He almost laughed, but it didn't quite make it. "I do stuff like that. Do you?" He looked at me. "I don't know what that means. I mean, do you actually believe you're clumsy? Or have you just been told you are often enough that it feels true?" He looked back at the water. The herons hadn't moved. He said, "She's under a lot of stress." I said, "Tell me about the business." His expression shifted. Ethan had started a landscape architecture firm 5 years ago with a colleague, working mostly on residential projects along the coast. He'd built it carefully and it was doing well by any reasonable measure. "It's fine. We're good. Is it still half yours?" He was very still. "What do you mean?" "Gerald approached me in September," I said carefully. "You didn't tell me that." He turned to look at me. "How do you know about that?" "He called me," I said. "He told me he was considering investing in Ethan and Mara's firm and wanted my perspective as your father. I told him I'd need to speak with you first. He said he'd already discussed it with you and you were on board." Ethan set his coffee down on the railing. He didn't look at me. "He told me that," he said slowly, "that he'd talked to you, that you thought it was a good opportunity." "I never spoke to him before that call," I said, "and I ended that call in 30 seconds. He closed his eyes. "Ethan, she asked me to consider it." He said it to the marshland. She said the firm needed capital to grow and her father was offering better terms than a bank, and it was a family investment, and I was being proud and difficult for no reason. "Did you have a lawyer look at the terms?" She said it would make her father feel like we didn't trust him. I kept my voice very even. "What are the terms?" he told me. It took him a few minutes to get through all of it. I listened without interrupting. The equity stake Gerald was requesting was not an investment. It was a mechanism for control, drafted in the language of generosity. If Ethan accepted it, within 18 months, Gerald Ashworth would have effective veto power over any major business decision. I had seen instruments like this. In my courtroom, in the context of financial abuse cases. "Son," I said when he was done, "I need you to listen to me carefully. What Gerald described to me in September and what you've just told me tonight are two different proposals. What you were told about my response to the first proposal is not true, and what Victoria told you about Gerald's intentions may not be what's actually happening here." He was quiet for a long time. "You think she lied to me?" "I think she may have told you what was necessary to get a particular outcome." He turned and looked at me then. Really looked at me, and I saw something in his face that I hadn't seen since he was 8 years old, and found out something about how the world actually worked that he had hoped wasn't true. Inside, someone laughed loudly. "Gerald." The sound carried through the glass door. "What do I do, Dad?" "Right now," I said, "nothing. Go back inside. Be pleasant. Don't give anyone reason to think anything has changed. Can you do that?" He nodded slowly. "And Ethan, have you talked to Mara about this? Your partner?" He looked at the porch floor. "No. Call her Friday morning." He picked up his coffee. "Is this bad?" I looked at my son. He was 42 years old, smart, talented, kind. A man who had built something real from nothing and was in the process of not understanding how it was being taken from him. "We're going to be fine," I said. Both of us. We went back inside. The rest of the evening I spent being a perfectly unremarkable dinner guest. I complimented the pie. I asked Gerald appropriate questions about his golf game. I let Christopher talk about himself, which required no encouragement whatsoever. Victoria watched me twice when she thought I wasn't looking, checking something, trying to read whether I had noticed anything, whether I was a problem. I gave her nothing to read. 68 years old. 22 years on the federal bench. 18 years before that as an attorney. I had sat across from people who had done genuinely terrible things and given none of them the satisfaction of knowing what I was thinking. One well-meaning holiday gathering in Palmetto Shores was not a particular challenge. I drove back to Asheville that night instead of staying over. I told Ethan I had an early morning. On the 4-hour drive home through the dark, I made 3 phone calls, all to people I'd worked with over the course of my career. I asked questions. I listened. I thanked them and hung up. Then I called Karen Delaney back. What I'm looking at may have a financial component, I told her. Then you need a family law attorney and a business attorney, she said. Separately. And Robert, he has to be the one who decides to move forward. You can prepare, but you can't act without him. I know, I said. I spent the next 6 weeks preparing. The first thing I did was call an old colleague from my years in Charlotte, a business attorney named David Prentice, who specialized in partnership disputes. I explained the situation in general terms and asked him to pull every public filing associated with Ashworth Commercial Insurance and Gerald Ashworth personally, not for action, for understanding. What David found over the following 2 weeks was interesting in the way that things are interesting when they confirm what you already suspected. Gerald Ashworth had done this before, not with his daughter's marriage, but with business associates. Twice in the past decade, he had entered into partnership arrangements with smaller firms, arrangements that began with investment language and ended with control. In one case, there had been a lawsuit. It had settled quietly. The second thing I did was spend time with my son. I drove to Charleston 3 times in December under ordinary pretexts. Once to help Ethan with a plumbing problem. Once to return some kitchen equipment his mother had left him that I'd found while cleaning out a closet. Once for no reason at all except that I wanted to see him and I told him so. On the third visit, I brought David Prentice's number on a card. I didn't frame it as an emergency. I put it on the kitchen counter when Victoria wasn't in the room and said, "This is a friend of mine, a business attorney in Charlotte. I've told him about your firm, in general terms. He'd be happy to talk with you about the structure of the equity proposal if you ever want a professional perspective. No pressure, no obligation." Ethan looked at the card for a long moment. Then, he put it in his pocket. He called David 4 days later. I know because David called to tell me, briefly, that the conversation had happened and that Ethan had asked smart questions and that David had offered to review the documents at cost as a professional courtesy. He didn't tell me anything confidential about what Ethan had said. He didn't need to. In January, Ethan called me on a Sunday morning. "Dad." He sounded different. Not better exactly, but more awake. Like someone who has been asleep in a particular way and has started to notice it. I talked to Mara. How did that go? She already knew something was wrong. She said she'd been waiting for me to bring it up for 2 months. She hired her own attorney in November after Gerald approached her directly without telling me. He approached your partner directly. Ethan made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Yeah. I looked out my window at the January mountains, the bare trees, the gray sky. Ethan, I said, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer me honestly. Okay, setting aside the business for a moment. How are you? How are you actually? Long pause. I don't know when it happened, he said finally. I don't know what year it started feeling like this. Like I'm a guest somewhere. Like I have to be careful all the time. Careful of what? Of being wrong. Of saying the wrong thing, or doing the wrong thing, or wanting the wrong thing. He stopped. That's not a normal way to feel in your own house, is it? No, I said. It isn't. I think I've been making excuses for a long time. That's very common, I said. It doesn't mean anything is wrong with you. It means you're a person who trusted someone he loved. He was quiet. What do? I want you to call Karen Delaney, I said. She's a family law attorney in Charleston. She is the best I know at what she does, and she's been expecting your call. You've already talked to her. I wanted to have someone ready, I said. In case you were ready. Another pause. Then, how long have you known something was wrong? Since Thanksgiving, I said. The cranberry sauce. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, I thought you didn't notice that. I notice everything, son. I always have. I just wait until I know what I'm looking at before I say so. The following weeks moved with the particular momentum of decisions that have been made in private before they are made in public. Ethan met with Karen Delaney twice. He met with David Prentice in person in Charlotte, and left with a clear understanding of exactly what signing Gerald's investment proposal would have meant for the firm. He talked to Mara, really talked to her, and discovered that his business partner had been protecting their company from a flanking move she hadn't wanted to alarm him about. She had refused Gerald's direct approach in November, and not told Ethan because she hadn't wanted to put him in the middle of something she suspected was more complicated than it appeared. She was right about that. In February, Ethan told Victoria he was filing for legal separation. I wasn't there for that conversation. I don't know exactly what was said. What I know is that Ethan called me afterward from the driveway of his house, sitting in his truck with the engine off. And this time, his voice was not low and afraid. It was shaking, but the way things shake when they've been under pressure for a long time and the pressure is suddenly released. I told her, he said. Dad, I told her. I know. How are you? I don't know. Scared. But also like I can breathe. That's the right response. Gerald called me, he said. About an hour after I told her, he told me I was making the worst mistake of my life, and that I had no idea who I was dealing with, and that he had attorneys who would bury me. What did you say? I told him I appreciated the call and that my attorneys would be in touch. I smiled at the Asheville winter outside my window. I also told him, Ethan said, and I could hear the ghost of something in his voice, something that had been missing for a long time. I also told him that he might want to speak with his own attorneys before making any further proposals related to my firm, because I'd had the documents reviewed by a business attorney who specialized in partnership disputes, and the structure of the proposal constituted potential grounds for a fraud claim under South Carolina commercial law. Good, I said. Gerald got quiet after that. People often do, I said. In March, I drove to Charleston to help Ethan move out some of his things. Not the furniture. That could be sorted later. The things that mattered. His grandfather's tackle box. The photograph albums. The fishing pictures that had been put in a box in the garage when the gallery wall went up. We loaded my Subaru in 2 hours. It was a bright, cold Saturday, seagulls moving overhead, the smell of the water. When we were done, Ethan leaned against the car and looked at the house. He stayed like that for a while. I waited. Do you think I failed? He asked. I thought about it the way I would have thought about a question put to me on the bench. Carefully, without rushing to the comfortable answer. I think you were in a situation designed to make you feel like you were always failing, I said. There's a difference. He nodded slowly. Your mother, I said. You know, she used to say that some people confuse being in charge with being in relationship. That's not love. Love doesn't require you to be smaller to survive it. He was quiet for a moment. I miss her, he said. So do I. We drove back to my place in Asheville and spent the evening on the porch the way we used to when he was in high school, talking about nothing in particular. The mountains going dark around us, the stars coming out over the ridgeline one at a time. The legal process took several more months. Karen Delaney was everything I had promised Ethan she would be. The separation agreement was negotiated carefully and fairly. The equity proposal from Gerald was never signed, and the threat of a fraud claim, which David Prentice had constructed with characteristic precision, persuaded Gerald's attorneys to advise their client against any further involvement with Ethan's firm. Gerald called me once during this period. I was in my workshop, sanding a rocking chair I'd been building for 6 months, when my phone rang with a Charleston number I didn't recognize. Robert. Gerald's voice had lost some of its dinner table volume. I think we got off on the wrong foot, you and I. I'd like to talk this through like reasonable men. I set down the sandpaper. I've been reasonable throughout this process, Gerald. My son has been represented by excellent counsel and is being treated fairly. I'm not sure what there is for us to discuss. He's making a mistake." His voice shifted into something that was meant to sound paternal. "Victoria loves him. Families go through rough patches. You know that." "What I know," I said, "is that you told my son I endorsed your investment proposal when I had never spoken to you about it. I know that you approached his business partner without his knowledge, and I know that your son-in-law spent 3 years in his own home feeling like a man who needed permission to exist. Those are not rough patches, Gerald." He was quiet. "I have a great deal of respect for your family name in this community," I said. "I hope you continue to find it worth protecting. Good evening." I hung up and went back to the rocking chair. What I didn't tell Gerald, because there was no need to, was that I had spent 22 years building relationships with every level of the South Carolina legal community, from clerks to appellate judges. I had not used those relationships to apply any pressure whatsoever. I hadn't needed to. Ethan had competent attorneys, David Prentice had prepared meticulous documentation, and the proposal Gerald had tried to sell as generosity had not survived contact with a professional review. The Ashworth name was not going to make a defective contract suddenly valid. The machine had worked as it was designed to work. I had simply made sure Ethan had access to it. By summer, Ethan was living in a rented apartment on the edge of downtown Charleston, a small place on the second floor with a balcony that overlooked a street of old live oaks. He'd brought the fishing pictures. They were the first things he'd put on the walls. I visited in June. We went fishing on the Edisto, just the two of us, up before 6, coffee in thermoses, the water silver in the early morning light. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. There's a specific quality of silence between people who understand each other and trust the understanding to hold without constant reinforcement. On the drive back, Ethan said, "Mara told me yesterday that we landed the Beaufort County Parks project. It's the biggest contract we've ever had." I smiled. "That's wonderful. We won it without Gerald's money." "You didn't need his money," I said. "You needed to believe you didn't need his money. Those aren't the same thing." He nodded. He drove for a while. Then, "Dad, why didn't you ever tell me you were still in touch with so many people from your career?" He paused. "Karen Delaney told me you helped establish the domestic law clinic at the Charleston courthouse. David Prentice told me you two tried 3 cases together in the 90s. I watched the South Carolina landscape go by, the long grasses, the water appearing and disappearing through the trees. You knew me as your father," I said. "I wanted to keep it that way." "Why?" "Because a father is the most important thing I've ever been," I said. "The rest was just work. Good work. Work I was proud of. But it ends. This doesn't." He didn't say anything for a while. Then, "They thought you were just a retired old man who drove a beat-up Subaru." I smiled. "People see what they're looking for." He laughed. It was a real laugh, uncomplicated, the kind I hadn't heard from him in too long. They really didn't know who they were dealing with. "They knew exactly who I was," I said. "They just misunderstood what that meant." The summer moved into fall. Ethan's firm continued to grow. He called me on Sunday mornings more often than he used to. The conversations were lighter, ranged wider, covered fishing and furniture, and the projects he was designing, and a woman he'd had dinner with twice, who was a marine biologist based in Beaufort, and seemed to make him talk faster, in a way I recognized as a good sign. One evening in October, I was sitting on my porch in Asheville with a cup of coffee and the kind of quiet that takes decades to earn when my phone rang. "Ethan." "Hey, son." "Hey, Dad. I just wanted to call." "No reason. Those are the best calls." He laughed. "How's the chair coming?" "Almost done," I said. "The joints are the last part. You have to take your time with the joints, or the whole thing comes apart eventually." He was quiet for a moment in the comfortable way. Then, "I've been thinking about something you said at Thanksgiving." "On the porch." "What's that?" "You said we were going to be fine. Both of us. I didn't believe you when you said it. And now? Now I think you knew something I didn't." "I knew you," I said. "I'd always known you, even when you'd temporarily forgotten who you were." He said goodnight after a while, and I sat with the quiet and the mountains and the October stars coming out over the ridge. There are people who believe that wisdom is the same thing as power, that what matters is the ability to move the pieces on the board, to make things happen, to be the kind of person other people have to reckon with. I spent 22 years in a role that gave me all of those things, and I learned something in that time that very few of my colleagues ever fully understood. The real work is never the case in front of you. The real work is the person beside you. The rest is just mechanism, useful when it's needed, invisible when it isn't. My son's fishing pictures are back on his wall. His firm has 2 new employees and a project in Beaufort County that will be beautiful when it's done. He calls on Sunday mornings. That's what I work toward. Not a verdict, not a judgment, not Gerald Ashworth's quiet retreat. Just my son, himself again, on the other end of the phone on a Sunday morning, talking freely. Everything else was simply making sure the table was set correctly when the time came. If this story meant something to you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it today. And take a moment to tell us in the comments where you're listening from. We read every one.